Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 159 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is The Lyme Therapist, an interview with Christina Kantzavelos. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
So, Matt, this is a really interesting podcast because one of the things that we've often criticized the medical community for is essentially segmenting or specializing to the point where they don't really have the ability to treat the whole person. And I kind of felt convicted after interviewing Christina because I feel like I've been doing the same thing, that I've been breaking up the physical and the emotional elements of Lyme disease. And she made it very clear that we are making a mistake by doing that.
And Rich, this was such an awesome interview. And we've been looking for somebody in the Lyme community who has become a therapist after going through a Lyme journey. And Christina is just that. She talked to us about so many powerful things and went into great detail about specific detox protocols and also ways to retrain your brain to heal from Lyme. She also went into not only just surviving from Lyme disease, but thriving with Lyme disease.
So, Matt, despite my best efforts to try to get Christina to focus only on the psychological, she resisted every effort that I made to do that. And she kept making sure that we understood that Lyme was a psychological illness, but it was also a physical illness. And it's not always easy to tease out the difference between the two. And this was just a really, really great interview. And I'm really excited to introduce the Lyme therapist, Christina Kantzavelos. Hey, Christina, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's been a long time coming and I'm thrilled.
Well, we're really thrilled to have you as well. It has been a long time coming, and we are so excited to present you to the Tick Bootcamp community because you're going to bring some stuff to this community that no one else has before. I don't want you to be too anxious about that because Matt and I are going to be very gentle, but we are going to require you to give a lot to the folks who are listening to this podcast, and we know you're going to be able to do that. So, Christina, talk to us about where you live.
I live in Joshua Tree, California, right outside of the national park. I moved here over the summer.
Are you a native of California or did you grow up somewhere else?
I am. I'm native to Southern California. I was born in Long Beach, raised in Orange County, went to school in Los Angeles. After grad school, moved to San Diego, and then ended up here.
So talk to us about what your childhood was like. What did you dream about doing when you were a young gal growing up in Southern California?
I dreamed of so many things. At one point, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a singer. Like you named it. I wanted to be a gymnast. Like you name it, I wanted to be it. I had so many. Oh, a roller coaster engineer. That was something for a while. Yeah, I remember having a very strong imagination and dreaming up all sorts of things.
So what drove you to the college that you went to and the major that you ultimately majored in?
Well, I ended up at UCLA. It wasn't necessarily my first choice. However, they did offer me a full ride for undergrad. I really actually wanted to go to UC Santa Cruz, but financially it just made sense for me to go to UCLA. And initially I was an anthropology major. I was just fascinated by everything related to cultural anthropology. I was really excited about it. But then the major was so impacted that if I continued on with it, it would have taken me an additional 1 to 2 years. So I ended up switching to Latin American studies and Chicano studies, which was pretty kind of paralleled cultural anthropology in many ways. And yeah, I was really happy with it. However, it's not, it doesn't lend to the most lucrative career as far as an undergrad degree is concerned. So I ended up deciding to go and get my master's in social work. And that was just because I really enjoyed helping people help themselves. And, I had a friend's mom who's a social worker really push me to go and do it. She's like, you're the perfect person for it. You're so empathic and sensitive, and it just makes sense for you. So I decided to move forward with that, and again, ended up at UCLA.
Talk to us about what you knew about ticks and tick diseases from your educational experience as a public school student in California and ultimately a college and graduate student in California.
Are you ready for it? Nothing. I knew nothing about it at all. Peripherally, I had heard about it, and that was the extent. I mean, you could have offered me $1 million to explain anything related to tick disease or illness or co-infections, and I wouldn't have been able to answer anything.
Now, I understand you're also a gal, because you were majoring in these cultural studies, probably did some traveling. During the course of your travels, did you ever learn anything about ticks or tick diseases?
Definitely not. Definitely not. I did contract like dengue fever as well as malaria at one point. Tapeworms, scabies. I've like, it's a joke. Like I'm like, I just go down the list of what I can collect as a souvenir when I travel to, often tropical third world areas. So no, I've been very sick on my travels, but none of them educated me on tick-borne diseases.
Now, before you took any of the trips that you took for your cultural travels, were you given information about the different diseases that you may confront and the vaccinations, for example, you may take to protect yourself from something?
Not really at all. No, honestly, no.
So talk to us about when you first started to show the symptoms of what you now know to be your tick disease.
Okay, well, I've had some chronic illness since infancy, but at around 8 years old, I began having migraines. And then in junior high, I had the typical Bartonella stretch marks on my inner thighs. And with that came panic disorder. That's what I was diagnosed with. I started having panic attacks all the time. I also started fainting. We didn't know why I was lightheaded or why I was fainting. And then sleeping. I remember for the longest time needing like 16 hours of sleep and not being able to pinpoint why, and going to various doctors and no one being able to help us at all. Then, there was an ebb and flow to it. I started feeling better, but then in high school, I felt and looked really inflamed. I just remember not feeling well in general. Then going to college, that continuing, and at one point breaking out in acne and having like PCOS symptoms. So they had diagnosed me with that, but the acne wasn't going away. And then turns out I had celiac disease. And I should also mention, when I was 19, I went to a cardiologist. My brother had passed away of cardiomegaly. So I went to go rule that out. And that's when I was diagnosed with POTS. So I was 19, which was pretty, that cardiologist was ahead of his time to diagnose dysautonomia. Still to this day, doctors don't know what dysautonomia is. So I had that diagnosis with me. And then, I collected celiac disease. I just collected them as I moved forward, hypothyroidism. And I was able to pretty much, move through life with these symptoms and diagnoses. Like, it didn't really impact my day-to-day living. Yeah, like in retrospect, I was like, wow, like my life was made a lot more difficult for sure. I can see that now. And as far as my concentration in school and, just how I processed information, but I didn't know any better. And then I started doing, after grad school, my focus was humanitarian work. So as soon as I was licensed, because it takes a really long time to become licensed as a psychotherapist, especially in the state of California, it's 3,200 hours post-grad under supervision. So it takes like on average around 6 years to complete. So after I received my license, I'm like, okay, first thing I'm doing is I'm applying for Doctors Without Borders. And I was super honored because they accept hardly anyone to be accepted in, but it's a process to even be matched with a country or project. So I started working for other NGOs, and for example, Red Cross disaster mental health. I would show up after disasters and I'd work 12-hour shifts on an ongoing basis, like really without very many breaks, which, was an issue in and of itself, but also a reflection of me not, being able to speak up on my own behalf and my health. And so what would happen is I'd go do these and I would be done for a week after. I was so fatigued and knocked out, and I couldn't really understand why. And then I went to Mexico after was it the 2018 earthquake. And I was like about an hour and a half south of Mexico City. And, we were creating sort of like a mental health plan, disaster plan. And I started experiencing really strange symptoms, more than before, like not being able to swallow, feeling like the throat was closing up, really just fatigued, unable to think straight. My stomach started hurting. I couldn't keep anything down. I got to the point where I ended up in their hospital there, and I had a terrible reaction to IV antibiotics, and I had to unfortunately cut that contract and get home because I needed to be somewhere where I had health insurance and family. And when I got back, I went to go see various specialists, a gastroenterologist. I had another endoscopy and colonoscopy, and I was just being passed around from specialist to specialist, and each one I was just collecting more and more diagnoses from, like lupus, mixed connective tissue disease, Sjogren's, like you name the autoimmune disease, and I've likely been diagnosed with it at some point. But meanwhile, all they wanted to do was stuff my face with steroids, which I refused, because I'm like, it's not that I'm anti-steroid necessarily. I think they're amazing for acute situations, but you're not going to find the root cause by giving me steroids. It's going to just potentially lead to more issues later down the road. As we know, they have tons of side effects with prolonged use. A friend of mine had recommended Bastyr University in San Diego. They're a naturopath university, sort of new to San Diego. They started out of Seattle, Washington. I went there, and I remember that I was there for like 4 or 5 hours, because the students see you, the med school students see you, and then their professor liaison comes and sees you to check what they've done, what they're testing for, that sort of thing. And they were like, this is basically outside of our scope. We think you should see the doctor across the way. He's a rheumatologist, and he used to teach there. You need to go see him. And that's what I did. I made an appointment, and again, knew nothing at this point about any tick-borne illnesses, and showed up to his office. He's like, tell me your story. And I do. And he's just looking up and down on me. So looking at presentation and information I'm providing to him. And he took one look at me and goes, cat scratch fever. And I'm like, the song? That was literally my response. Like, I looked at him so strangely, and my former partner was with me at this moment, and we just looked at each other like, this guy is a Looney Tunes, like like where is he and I'm sorry to say that as like a mental health provider, but like what is this? What is he making this up? Come on. And he's like, no, it's Bartonella. It's a Lyme co-infection. He's like, I already know, just looking at you and hearing what you have to say, but we'll do some tests to confirm it. And he did like this ultrasound. He did ultrasound tests. He did all sorts of exams, and then of course lab work. And I should mention, before I got to this point, I'd returned back from Mexico. I'd returned back to my, because I was working in a hospital for a long time. And then I was also doing home health, visiting patients in their home. And I was, I'd be driving to them and like almost fainting at their house or fainting on the way. And the last straw was I was collecting my paperwork at work one day, and I was like, I don't know if I did faint or I almost fainted. I just remember there were a lot of people there, and like, luckily, they were at blood pressure cuffs. So I'm like, oh, maybe it's my POTS acting up. So I'd known that was the last straw. I couldn't work anymore. Like this was it was inappropriate and unsafe for me to work at a job like this.
So Christina, in total, how many doctors did you see from the time you first began to show symptoms until the time that you were finally diagnosed with a tick disease?
Oh my gosh. I mean, like since a young, that young age, I'm going to say at minimum 50 to 75. I'm not exaggerating, not even exaggerating a little bit. And again, no one brought up that it could have been a tick-borne illness. And I think that is because we're in California where we don't have Lyme disease. What are you talking about? Which is, now of course people are opening their eyes up to it, but for the longest time they didn't. And that's when I was symptomatic. That's when I needed someone to open up their eyes to it and present that as as something to rule out in my body. And when I kept, like I said, I kept being passed around as like a hot potato, all these specialists in our medical system between Scripps and UCSD and San Diego. And one of the doctors I went to go see, after Schickman, I'm like, because they would recommended one at UCSD and then my Lyme literate physician, and he was like, there's no such thing as chronic Lyme disease. Like your doctor is lying to you, and that can't possibly be it. And I was just like, oh, and we'll get into it, but there is such thing as medical PTSD. And if someone's going to coin it, it's me. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be said. And oftentimes it is because these doctors gaslight us so much, and it takes forever to finally get the diagnosis, and what you have to go through all of that time in the interim of getting that diagnosis is so traumatic. And
well, let's talk about that. So, but Christina,
okay.
Let's pause there, right? So you went on this lengthy diagnostic journey. Yeah. How did the lengthy diagnostic journey impact you emotionally?
Oh, well, it made me feel like I was at some points psychologically unwell, because I'm like, am I really experiencing these things? Is it psychosomatic? What's going on? Like, clearly these doctors don't believe me. And here I am I'm losing my job. I can't possibly work feeling this way, even though they were so supportive as a company. I was contracted, so it's not like I was going to get disability pay. Like, I was one of those really lucky, privileged people where I had this partner who was like, I will take care of us financially. You need to take care of your health. And not everyone has that luxury. And I will forever be grateful to him for allowing that space to me to just focus on healing. But for me to experience what I was going through, to experience what he was going through watching me, and then eventually ending up couchbound. I had to move in with my parents because he worked. He couldn't bathe me. He couldn't feed me. Like, I needed my mom, who at that point was not working and was home and could be my caregiver. So to watch her watching me was heartbreaking. Like, there are so many emotional components to this. There was also the aspect that not many of us discuss, which is grief and chronic illness. I had to grieve this identity I once had as a humanitarian worker, that I worked so hard to get to that point, to know now, like with my doctor being like, you keep doing this, like you may die. Like, this isn't something you can continue doing. Like, I had to change my lifestyle to cater to this new identity. And there was a lot of grief in that. So I don't know. I don't even know where to start as far as unpacking everything emotional that came with that. But there is so much.
Let's spend some time talking about the social impact of your diagnostic journey. Mm-hmm. Who else was affected, and how were they affected by the diagnostic journey that you were traveling?
I would say, namely my partner. And because, there's this feeling of a lack of control. He felt like he couldn't help me. My parents, of course, I don't know if you consider work being social at all, but I think that was tough for them too, because I was like a star employee, and then they just basically witnessed me wither away and not know what was going on. And then of course, you know, my friends as well, they totally witnessed me change. I wasn't the same person I was before. And yes, like we're constantly changing, right? That's part of impermanence. Like nothing is forever, but it was pretty extreme. And it was difficult for me to witness them witnessing me.
And did the challenges that your health presented and the challenges that it presented in your relationships cause you to lose relationships?
I think it was part of the, you know, the ultimate demise in my relationship with my former partner. And that's really tough. As far as friends are concerned, a lot of my friends do have chronic illness themselves, and they were really understanding. But of course, there were some moments of me having to cancel plans over and over again. And at some point, people stop wanting to invite you because they just presume you're going to say no to them. And that was, you know, that was a little bit tough, but I accepted it because I get to some extent where they're coming from. Maybe they felt like they didn't want me to feel obligated to join. I don't know. But I'm a pretty compassionate person, and I figured, hey, if I explain my situation and they don't understand, then that's more of a reflection of their own stuff, not my own. And I'm just going to move forward with my life. And if we meet again at some point in the future and can have a dialogue regarding the situation, awesome. If not, it is what it is.
So how much of this journey do you believe caused you to pivot from your undergraduate course of study to your graduate course of study?
I went straight into grad school. And
but you pivoted your career, or at least your career concentration. And I guess I'm wondering whether the experiences that you were having with your undiagnosed at that time chronic disease caused you to pivot to the mental health community.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think I've always had a pretty altruistic attitude and knew I liked to help people, but this goes deeper, and we'll for sure delve into it. But I had codependent attributes, and that also, I think, is part of the reason I got so sick. I'm a recovering people pleasing addict. Like I love to help people. You know, I literally can say I'm addicted to helping other people. And what that means is I place people before I should say. I'm recovering, so I'm trying not to do that as much anymore. And I think I'm somewhat succeeding. But always placing people before myself. And that's something you see to be pretty common in the chronic illness community, where we people please. We don't take care of our health, our well-being first. We do that for everyone else, and it's unhealthy. And I think that's totally part of the reason I went into a degree, a profession that reflects that, because like I said, it was like this dependence on helping others. So there was that. And also, like, if we're going to dive deeper a little bit over here, you know, I lost my brother when I was 19 to drug addiction, and I had survivor's guilt. I couldn't save my brother, so I want to save everyone else. So there's this ego shame component. And yes, like that may seem like completely like only mental health related, but it's also completely related to my chronic illness and definitely played a part in it.
So talk to us about why being a people pleaser is not a healthy mindset, and how much you believe your Lyme disease journey played into creating that unhealthy mindset.
It's unhealthy for numerous reasons. I think we totally put it on this pedestal, like, oh, I remember being called like a Mother Teresa throughout my career. And people love a people pleaser. We're highly regarded. People want to be around us because we're pleasing them, we're taking care of them. And the reason we ultimately become people pleasers is out of survival. We so often, there's the fight and flight response, but there's also freeze, and there's also fawning. And fawning is that if you're in a traumatic situation, especially in a chronic sense, you want to appease everyone and everything going on to bring peace to it and to ensure that you survive the situation. So that as long as you're taking care of everyone else, fawning, not being in anyone's way, that maybe you're going to avoid any sort of harm. But the problem with that is it continues on if you don't address it and into your adulthood, and it starts to affect everything. You end up in positions, jobs often, where you go above and beyond, and you're not praised for it, or you get into a toxic relationship where you give 75% and they give you 25%, and you also end up a little bit resentful of that situation. Yet you can't stop taking care of other people, or giving and giving and giving. And when you place people before yourself, you don't take care of yourself, and it can make you really sick. And that's what happened to me, and I see it happen to so many others, and they wonder why, and yet they keep doing what they're doing, and they think they're being helpful. And it's a way to gain love and affection, but that's really not how it goes. When we take care of ourselves first, we take care of others. When we heal ourselves, we heal others. And what use are you if you get really sick and something happens to you? Who are you going to help at that point? Really, no one.
So Christina, let's pause there for a second.
Sure.
Let's talk about the fight or flight response.
Yes.
And how that presented in you. Was that a physiological response to your Lyme disease, or was it an emotional response to your Lyme disease symptoms?
I think it was a little bit of both, honestly. I do, in my heart of hearts, believe it all starts emotionally and manifests physiologically. But the physiological aspects keep you on that hamster wheel of fight or flight mode. And so many of us with chronic illness don't realize we're in fight or flight mode, because we're thinking oh, when you're in fight or flight mode, you're running from a tiger, you're having a panic attack. And it's no. This can be, it's so chronic, it's so subtle, you wouldn't even realize it. But you're in fight or flight mode when you have chronic illness, because your body is going to prioritize one of two things: running from that tiger chronically, right? Or healing. It can't really do both. It needs to focus on one. So it's so important to get out of that fight or flight, freeze, fawn response, so that your body can now start focusing on healing, that you can give it that space.
So let's talk about what we were taught are the 4 F's from fight or flight. It sounds like you may be bringing a 5th F into that. So in some of the research that I've done, I think specifically, I think John Asseroff's work suggests that the fight or flight mode will bring you into fighting, fleeing, fainting, freezing. Now you're bringing a 5th F in, which is fawning. So let's talk about those 5 F's and the impact that the 5 F's have on your ability to heal when you're in the fight or flight mode.
Yeah, so like I said, your body's going to prioritize saving you, like survival, or healing. And when we don't realize we're experiencing fight or flight mode, it's difficult for our bodies to begin that process of regeneration, I should say, and healing. So I think the first step is recognizing you are in fight or flight mode to begin that true healing journey. Because when treating Lyme disease, we are so focused on just the physiological, and we don't think about the mind and body connection. And they are one. They are not disconnected. They are one. One affects the other, and the other affects the other, and it's cyclical. It's ongoing. Yeah.
So let's bring this back to your experience.
Mhm.
For how long a time were you in fight or flight mode, and was it constant? Meaning, were you always in that mode between the time that you first started showing your tick disease symptoms and the time that you were diagnosed, or was this something that came and left?
I think that it's chronic. It's sort of like a chronic illness in that respect. It's not, it can present as acute, like for example, an actual panic attack, but it can also be so subtle that you don't really notice. It doesn't impact your day-to-day living to the point someone was like, oh my gosh, you know, your cortisol levels are off the chart. You need help. You need to get to the ER or the hospital or see a specialist. And that's what's scary about it, because it can be that subtle. So to answer your question, I think I have personally been in chronic fight or flight mode for a long time. And, you know, it impacts your immune system. We don't, you know, you have the sympathetic system of, that calms you down. You're in a calm state. And then you have the parasympathetic system that responds to danger. And I've been in that parasympathetic mode for, I think I'm out of it now, thankfully, but I was in it for a very long time, and it impacted my immune system and made me susceptible to various diseases manifesting in my body on a physiological level.
So how does the fight or flight mode impact your immune system?
Well, again, like when you're in fight or flight mode, your body has to prioritize survival. So your immune system function is going to be on the back burner while your body continues to run from danger. And when it's on the back burner, it's not able to maybe fight the various things that you have going on, because we know that you can have Lyme in the body for a long time and then see it triggered. And I do believe that various emotional responses, traumas, so on and so forth, can trigger disease.
So let's talk about the fight or flight mode and how it sort of becomes a cycle, right?
Mhm.
It almost sounds to me like your body went into fight or flight because of a physical illness, and then what was happening is, as events in your life were developing as a result of this chronic illness, it continued to trigger the fight or flight mode. So for example, when you couldn't think clearly,
Mhm.
your body was feeling attacked, so you had a fight or flight response. When you had friends who didn't understand how you were feeling, you went to fight or flight, and that just kept triggering and triggering and triggering.
Sure. So, you know, we get to the point with, especially when we've had various traumas, and in this case, chronic, well, we talked about, you know, medical trauma, which is a real thing. I'm going to keep repeating that because it totally is. You know, we get to a point of needing a certain level of adrenaline, and we kind of end up attracting to things that keep us at this certain level of fight or flight mode, if you will. So just that parasympathetic elevated response. And we become like chronically afraid, scared, frustrated, mad, and these sort of emotions keep us at that level, right? It's difficult for us to think in this positive way, because that's not as exciting. And I mean that in the sense of, it doesn't match the adrenaline rush that keeps us in this chronic fight or flight mode. So we don't even realize we're seeking things to get us there. And we briefly talked about, like, sometimes there's these like support groups out there that are supposed to be supportive, but they end up being really negative. And we don't realize that's feeding our adrenaline, that's feeding our chronic fight or flight mode. And we need to get out of it. That's not healthy. That's not going to help in healing our bodies.
So talk to us about the emotions that are triggered by the fight or flight mode, and what chemicals are released during that fight or flight mode.
So when there's anything, we come up against anything stressful or like really exciting, our bodies release cortisol. And cortisol is a stress hormone. It's wonderful if, again, you're in like a super stressful situation and need to get out of it, for survival purposes. But what happens is, when you are chronic, like when you're releasing it on a regular basis, it starts to affect your body on a physiological level. It's not a hormone you really want to be pumped into you on a consistent basis. We really want our hormones to be balanced, and cortisol affects our immune system's function. It really impacts it in a negative way, which is why often Lyme literate physicians will test your cortisol levels to see where you're at. Now, in terms of what they do to help with that is a whole other podcast episode, because we need to talk about the emotions related to that, but it's okay. So yeah, you have this cortisol pumping. You also, your limbic system, your reptilian brain, that's also impacted, and you just continue to be in this chronic survival mode, and it's just not healthy for your body or your mind.
So let's talk about the mind and what is unhealthy about the mind, meaning what emotions are the cortisol and the adrenaline causing you to feel when you're in this chronic state of fight or flight?
It's fear. That's the biggest emotion. And fear in itself, like we said, it puts you in that sympathetic response. It makes you pump out that cortisol. It gets your limbic system revved up, and you just, what is it? What fires together wires together. So we start associating certain things as being negative when maybe they're not. And it's kind of a snowball effect, honestly.
So how did that present in you on your diagnostic journey? Meaning now these fires together goes together. Is that the
yeah? What fires together wires together. What happened was that I started creating negative associations with everything. Like I couldn't. Okay, so I had photosensitivity, so I couldn't go out in the sun. God forbid. I couldn't walk more than 100 feet without feeling faint. So I developed this like phobia around walking too far. I started having, because I have mast cell symptoms, which can often manifest because of Lyme disease. I was reacting to so many different foods. I was down to 20 quote unquote safe foods, right? In my head, it's like, what is safe? What is dangerous? There's no gray area in between. If someone wanted to hang out with me, they couldn't wear any synthetic scents. They had to wash their clothes. And I mean, in my recommendation, everyone should live a non-toxic life. anyway. Like nothing should be scented unless it's like essential oils, because it's just not good for us. They're endocrine disruptors. But again, another story. But like I got to the point where I couldn't, if I was in the grocery store, I couldn't walk down the cleaning aisle. And it actually revved up my partner's sense of smell, and same with my parents. Like they would walk ahead of me places to let me know if something had any sort of scent. And then I started wearing a mask places. I developed a fear around just about everything. Couldn't drive. I was so fearful of that. God forbid if I was driving, I ended up in traffic. Like that would cause me to go into full panic mode. And I noticed that my food options were dwindling. Like I couldn't have any real like social interactions. I became so scared of the world around me. And it was really sad to watch, because if you knew me from before, I was this like really just like risk-taking traveler who tried and did everything and was so fun-loving. And I just felt like, I don't know, a body with nothing going on but fear and survival. That's the point I had gotten to, and being couchbound and having to be taken care of by my mom. Like that wasn't anything I would have ever, you asked me what I dreamt of as a kid, definitely not that. That was a huge fear for me. I wouldn't have wished that upon anyone. And I was there, I was experiencing it.
So Christina, you were talking about the reptilian brain and the impact that being in fight or flight had on your brain processes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain to us what impact that had on your cognitive thought processes and your ability to think when you're in that fight or flight mode?
Yeah, it caused an ability to not be able to think, because I was hyper focused on survival. I needed to make sure I was constantly quote unquote safe. And what I associated with safe, I mean, going back again to what wires, what wires together, or what fires together wires together. I started wiring all of these things to one another. What was deemed safe, what was deemed dangerous, except my list of safe, became barely anything at all. And what became dangerous was this long list. And that was my limbic system, my reptilian brain, trying to save me, or so I thought, because, and the limbic system's amazing when it comes to like associating things with danger. Like, we're, as kids, we may touch fire and realize, oh, that hurts, that burned. And then we wire that in our heads. That's the best example of it. So we officially wired touching fire does not feel good. Well, in chronic illness, we start to wire so many things. It's not just fire, it becomes things that even are really healthy and good for us often. And we associate it with being negative.
So what did you ultimately conclude was negative that prevented you from getting the help that you needed to get a proper diagnosis?
Well, I'd gotten a proper diagnosis and I'd started treatment, and that's when like the snowball effect really took place, because I was herxing so much from my medications. And I got to the point where I was so desperate. I'm like, these supplements are only getting me this far. Like I need something more. And I wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't, even as someone who's a psychotherapist, I wasn't thinking straight at that moment. There was really no critical thinking happening. I wasn't thinking about the mind-body connection and, healing past traumas, where I was just in my thinking patterns in general and how that affected me on a physiological level. And so I was desperate. I was asking, anyone and everyone, how did they heal from chronic illness? How did they heal from Lyme? And, we've talked about this. There's no one size fits all approach, but I really was taking so much into consideration. it took me journaling and we can get into that, but it took me journaling every day and with simple prompts, so I wouldn't have to think too hard about it, because I really experienced extreme brain fog, to start connecting the dots and what was affecting me day to day. And that's what got me to do something called EMDR, which is what this amazing therapeutic modality, especially for trauma, especially for getting you out of that fight or flight mode response, in addition to completing a neural retraining program. The combination of those two things, of course, there were other components as well that helped me heal, but those two things got me out of fight or flight mode. Those two things got me to the point where my body felt safe enough to start healing.
So let me bring it back to your diagnosis. You were finally diagnosed with Lyme disease when you met with a doctor who diagnosed you with cat scratch fever.
Mm-hmm.
What other diagnostic tests did the doctor do, and what else were you diagnosed with other than the clinical diagnosis of Bartonella?
So I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, Bartonella, various strains of both, mold, let's see, heavy metals. I also had parasites in the beginning, and it's one of those things that's like, which do you take care of, handle first?
Now you're still in fight or flight mode, right? I mean, you're so.
Oh yeah.
Let's pause there for a second. When you finally get your diagnosis of Lyme disease, what impact does that have on your fight or flight mode? Is it making it better? Is it making it worse? Or
like a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, in the sense that I felt vindicated. Like, I am not making these symptoms up in my head. I knew nothing about tick-borne illness before, and now reading about it, it's like, oh my gosh, like, this is exactly what I have. There was also this sense of sadness of, why didn't anyone else ever bring this up as a potential diagnosis? And then there was me getting into these support groups and reading about it and going, oh wow, I don't know if I'm going to survive this. This is really scary, because you don't read too much about success stories. Like, when I was initially diagnosed, I didn't really see success stories on social media and in these groups. Now, of course, you do, and I'm so glad for it. And it's really important that when we get to that point, we share our stories to provide hope to others, because at that moment in time, I wasn't seeing those stories. So I was mortified. I'm like, am I truly feeling the way I do, seeing what I'm seeing? Am I going to survive this? And of course, my Lyme literate physician's like, you are going to heal from this, which those words were extremely impactful and important for me to hear. But it was difficult to hear those simultaneously, while reading about everyone's trials and tribulations around the diagnosis.
so you discussed with us a little bit earlier, you got to a point where you crashed. You couldn't work anymore. You had to move back in with your parents. Your mom had to bathe you.
Yes.
How long before or after your diagnosis did the crash arrive?
The crash arrived probably a month before my diagnosis, I would say. And I just deteriorated from there. And I was thinking the medications would help me, but I wasn't familiar with the Herxheimer, response and reaction. And, how, for lack of better words, gnarly that can be, and how it can knock you off your feet. So I was already knocked off my feet essentially, but this did me in. And I think it was about 6 months of me being couchbound, of me thinking I was probably going to die. That's just the point I got to. I was imagining, like, the doctor said I had another month or two to live, I wouldn't even bother arguing. I would probably accept it, because I felt as though my system was just done. I felt like my body was betraying me. I was so frustrated. I was so mad. I was so angry at myself. And I'm going to bring it back to journaling got me out, like gave me a light at the end of the tunnel to start seeing that there was hope, to start seeing that I did have a future, that I wasn't going to die. I was determined to figure this out, not just for myself, but for others too.
Christina, I do want to point out, and I don't want to go too far ahead here, that you just noted that you felt like you were going to die. If a doctor told you you were going to die in 2 months, you would have accepted that because that's how you felt. And physically, that was true based on your physical symptoms. And fast forward, you were able to get better and heal. So I just want to give that little sort of foreshadowing ahead and provide hope for people that are listening. And when we get there to talk more about that. But I want to now kind of go back to your diagnosis. When you finally got diagnosed, you were in such a bad state. What was it like working with these doctors? Were you leaning on your mom and your family to help you make proper decisions because you were so sick?
Yeah, I would have someone always attend appointments with me because of my brain fog, to ensure that I was understanding and getting all of the information out of each appointment. Yeah, it was definitely a group effort for sure, because I was not in the proper mind space or headspace to be able to really understand, interpret, and accept what was happening.
And what was your treatment plan now? So you finally got your diagnosis with Lyme and multiple co-infections and mold exposure. What was your initial treatment plan with your doctor?
Initially, he put me on something called Alinea. It's actually a very strong antiparasitic, but it has both antiviral and antibiotic components to it. So it's been known to like hit, 2 or 3 birds with one stone, but it's very, very intense. I was also placed on like a plethora of supplements. I think I was up to 26 at one point at the height of everything. And then I got really sick with that. Like it seemed like after 6 months, I was starting to get better and better and better. And then I got hit again with the flare up. And that's when I decided to stop the Alinea because it was so strong. And that's when like my mast cell symptoms came to a head. And I was blaming mast cell for not being able to eat all of these foods, not being able to be around all of these smells. That's what I mean. I kept blaming what it really wasn't, which was no one was saying you're in chronic fight or flight mode. That's what's happening. This is a snowball effect. But yeah, to answer your question, it was Alinea, it was IV therapy, and then I was seeing other practitioners as well, like alternative therapies to help me with like detoxing and just supporting my immune system.
So Christina, can you give us a little more detail? What specific IVs were you getting? And what other things were you doing specifically to detox and help your body rid of these toxins?
Well, no one really explained to me when I was initially diagnosed how important detox pathways are. No one explained that to me. And that's like, to this day, that's still that's one of my challenges, is ensuring that my detox pathways stay open. So I was potentially killing the Lyme disease, the parasites, but not detoxing what I was killing. They say like kill, bind, sweat. Well, I was killing, I was binding, it wasn't coming out. And I didn't realize that was just prolonging what I was experiencing. I was with the IVs, it was like a Myers cocktail, except I couldn't do magnesium because of the POTS. It would lower my blood pressure too much. And then at one point I was diagnosed with like pretty extreme hypoglycemia, and that was being caused by supplements we didn't know at the time, of course. And this is why just documenting what you're taking, what you're doing is really important. So I thought it was the vitamin C, because vitamin C can lower your glucose levels. So I stopped the vitamin C, I stopped the magnesium, and I was just getting everything else. And I felt like I needed the IV therapy to keep me alive. It was like getting gas in your car, if you will. So 2 to 3 times a week, doing that.
And that was primarily vitamins and the Myers cocktail and the IV, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And Christina, you hit on something earlier that I want to come back to, is that you said that your fight or flight mode was the reason you were having a lot of these mast cell problems or food allergies or scent or smell allergies. Can you talk to us more about the connection between your fight or flight mode and your hormones and developing these mast cell problems, or as many people call it, mast cell activation syndrome with Lyme disease?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I've been, properly diagnosed with mast cell activation syndrome. I'm not minimizing at all that it's not a real diagnosis. It's just that it's not completely to blame for, at least in my experience, for what I went through, because, I could blame mast cell for being down to, those 20 safe foods and not being able to walk down the cleaning aisle. I mean, I've always been sensitive to scents and whatnot, but what happens is your body, your limbic system starts to think that it's not just harmful, like this is going to kill you. And you associate it with that, when in fact, like, smelling something, perfume, isn't likely going to kill you. Like, I don't think there are very many instances where that's going to happen. But like, if something smelled, I'd be clenching my EpiPen, ready to use it, because it felt as though my throat was closing, as though I couldn't breathe. And that was like my cortisol going off. That was my limbic system being like, warning, 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 smelling this is going to kill you. But that wasn't, it wasn't the case. It just wasn't the case. And it was neural retraining that retrained my brain to realize these foods, these scents, these situations aren't going to kill you. They're not. And I know that now for a fact, because I still have a mast cell diagnosis, but I am back to eating every single item I was eating prior to diagnosis, except one thing, which is oysters. I had an anaphylaxis reaction to it. So I haven't reintroduced that, but I've reintroduced every other food. And maybe it felt like I was symptomatic for a minute or two after eating them. But with more and more exposure therapy, I was able to convince my brain not only that it's okay, but what fires together, wires together. I fired that this food is safe, I'm okay. And so, you think of what fires together, wires together as being something only negative associations. No, we can create really positive associations. And that's what I started doing. I can now walk through the cleaning aisle. Of course, it's COVID, so I can't do it without a mask, but I'm guessing I would be able to at this point. If I'm around a situation, or, I go to a doctor's appointment and there's a scent, I don't feel like my throat's closing up again. So this is what I mean by healing through getting off that fight or flight mode hamster wheel. It is possible. I am a walking example of it. And I know others who are also walking examples of it. And I just wish I would have heard myself when I was really sick and had known this and had started that journey and that process. And that someone would have told me how important that component is in healing. It's not just supplements and physiological healing that's necessary. It's also, your emotional and mental health that plays just as much of a part, if not sometimes even more so. And
Christina, I think you're the perfect example of giving hope in every aspect of your healing journey. And we couldn't agree more that healing is both physical and emotional. And to your point about mast cell activation syndrome, we've had many past podcast guests have MCAS, and we know it is a real condition. It is a real problem. But many past podcast guests have done what you've done. They've done things like EMDR, or the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, as well as like DNRS, to retrain their brains And as a result of that, they were able to have either zero or significantly reduced responses to things that used to trigger an allergic reaction or a mast cell reaction. So that is possible. And I think that's something that, everybody should explore on their own individually, but it's something that's a possibility or a hack or a tip to help people that are suffering from MCAS potentially. So the next piece I want to discuss with you, though, Christina, is you went off this medication that was really this hardcore antiviral, antibacterial approach. And when you went off of that, where was your health at that point? Because you mentioned it was about 6 months. You started to feel a little bit better, and you started to feel worse. When you went off of that with your other things that you were doing, where was your health at, and where did you move next in your treatment journey?
So I'd finally returned back home to live with my partner again because I was feeling well enough to, which was so exciting. And then this was trying to think, June, I think it was June. Yeah. It felt like I took 10 steps back, and we didn't know why the fatigue came in. I mean, the fatigue was there, just not as terrible as it was before, but it came back, and we realized it was likely because the Alinea, I was on it for a really long time. So I got off of it, but I was still feeling unwell. And then I started almost having these really terrible episodes, and we thought they were POTS related. I fainted. I remember it was my birthday. We were supposed to go to Banff National Park, and it was a big deal because that was like the first time I had really traveled in a long time. And en route to the airport, I fainted, and my glucose was in the 40s. So noticed I was having these really intense hypoglycemic attacks, and we couldn't figure out what it was. And finally, after a while, we realized it was one of the supplements I was taking. And I think it took me enough times of sort of having these negative reactions to start really paying attention to side effects of anything I place in my body. And for me personally, it's anything that could potentially lower blood pressure or blood sugar, I refuse to take. But it also lended to me fearing taking any new supplement. Anytime. Oh, and I should also mention, I ended up adding a new Lyme literate physician to my treatment team as a second opinion, because these types of things I noticed, there was a trend of I would be on a new supplement or a new treatment, and I would get really, really sick. So I wanted just a second opinion to make sure we were all on the same page. And at this point, I kept thinking my doctors know everything. I trust them. They have, they have the best intentions for my health and well-being. And I still to this day do think that's true, but it's unfair to presume that they follow my health to a T at all times when they have so many other patients to be concerned about. So I learned, I don't know if you want to say the hard way or whatever you want to call it, that I had to advocate and be on top of my health more than anyone else. And I feel I just digressed in answering your question.
No, Christina, this is all brilliant. And the next question I want to ask you about is, in your pre-interview questionnaire, you talked about the impacts that EMFs had on your healing journey. So can you talk to us a little about how you came to that conclusion that EMFs were harming your healing, and how you then responded to that and what you did to counter that?
Yeah, so anything that could be deemed toxic, I really tried to mitigate in my life. So, I started eating nutrient-dense food, and switched over to clean beauty, clean cleaning products. And that also included, EMFs are everywhere, the electromagnetic fields, radiation, it's everywhere. There's no way you can completely avoid it. But I did notice that I got this router cover. I have this case over my phone. I noticed just doing little things like that really really helped me. For example, I got the AirPods as a gift, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be really helpful to me. And 2 days after using them, I experienced extreme vertigo, and I couldn't figure out. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I having a flare up? What's happening? And finally, I'm like, oh, it's the AirPods. So I am sensitive to EMFs more than other people. I don't think they're beneficial to anyone per se. I don't think radiation's beneficial in general to our population, but doing what I can to mitigate exposure has been huge, and ensuring that I ground every day. I walk outside barefoot. I should also mention, part of the reason I ended up here in Joshua Tree was because we had a mold situation in San Diego. It's a long story, but I needed to get somewhere that was dry, where I could just completely focus on healing. And out here, we're outside of a national park. It's a rural environment. I came from an urban environment, and I've totally noticed a difference in my health and well-being since being here. And I know the biggest part of that is that I'm in nature, and nature is so healing, but there's also just less radiation, and it's drier.
Christina, talk to us more about grounding. We've heard this mentioned by many people, and we've touched on it, but never explored how it actually helps you. So you mentioned walking outside barefoot and grounding. Can you explain to us what grounding is and how it helps you?
Yeah. So what grounding does is it has a bunch of benefits. Like, I know it can reduce like muscle damage and pain, but it's scientific. So scientifically, the ground has negative ions, and earthing or grounding sort of here, I'm not a scientist, and it's like I wasn't expecting to explain it, but for my understanding, it basically pulls like toxins, radiation, those sorts of things, and pulls it into the ground, and sort of, oh, you know what, I feel I know what its benefits are. I know it boosts immunity, it regulates sleep, it reduces stress. I know there's like an electrical connection to the Earth's energy. So this is sounding super.
No, I think, Christina, I think you're spot on. I think what you're saying is that grounding really, it allows electrical charges from the earth to have a positive impact on your body. There's a symbiotic relationship between the earth and your body, and when your bare feet touch the earth, there's a benefit to your health with those electrical charges. Basically, I think is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, like we're bioelectrical beings, right? And we carry this this positive charge, but that's not positive. You think positive charge, positive, no, but that builds up in our bodies, and the earth has negative ions. So I know, like, when we connect with the earth, that excess of energy, like it produces a healing effect on a cellular level, like the negative ions and our positive charge, like it takes that out of us. And I know, like I'd mentioned, it reduces inflammation. I know it reduces cortisol. It's supposed to increase energy. I think I already said, like, decreases pain. I've just noticed when I do it, I feel really good.
So Christina, normally I focus heavily on the treatments and the supplements and the prescriptions. And, as you probably noticed, Rich talks more about your transformation and the emotional component. But I just want to ask you, I feel like, and hopefully this is not coming across as a loaded question, but do you believe somebody can heal from Lyme disease without addressing the emotional and psychological impacts of having Lyme disease?
I believe anyone can heal from anything at the end of the day. That's what I believe.
That is a perfect answer to my loaded question.
Yeah. I don't, everyone's body is different, but ultimately you can heal from anything.
And I just want to say from my personal experience, and again, I think not everybody is the same. I know not everybody is the same, but without addressing some of the medical trauma I've experienced, the emotional trauma I've experienced, and being able to sort of unwrap that and deal with that, I don't think I'd be where I am today in my healing journey without going through that transformation. So I think that's sort of what I was trying to get at with that loaded question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't, and I agree with you. The folks I've been privileged to meet who have healed from Lyme and from chronic illness have all gone on that emotional healing journey. I've yet to meet someone who hasn't. That's why I don't want to take that away from someone who has potentially healed without addressing the emotional component. And that's awesome if they have. I just, in my own experience, haven't come across them yet.
Listen, now talk to us more about where you're at with your health at this point, because now are you still couch bound? Are you able to now, you're back with your partner, you said,
we were back together, and then the mold situation happened in our home, and we decided to split up, and then I moved to Joshua Tree over the summertime. I'm a completely different person in the best of ways. People talk about going like, oh, I want to go back to who I was and how I was. And it's like, no. Like, we are like, this experience is only when we heal, and when we heal from it. I mean, I'm forever healing from it. I know I will forever be healing. Has turned me into such a better person in a multitude of ways. Like, I don't want to go back to who I was, because who I was is how I ended up with Lyme disease. That's the truth of the matter. And I'm different. I'm so much more healed. Like, I am back to eating almost, like I had mentioned, all the foods I was eating before. I can be around scents. I can go out in the sun. For the longest time, I was afraid of the sun. Okay. Like, I was afraid of everything. I can go on hikes. The amount of fear I had was like, I can't quite describe it. And I feel so sad that I was living with that for a really long time, that I was living in dis-ease. And a big part of my healing was, or has been and continues to be, prioritizing ease in my life. And when I feel uncomfortable, recognizing it and getting away from it.
So, Christina, I do want to point out for our listeners that, we've talked about a lot of things, and I have a few more questions before I hand it back to Rich. And I'm sorry for dominating your attention here. I know Rich is dying to speak, but this has only been over about a year and a half window, right? You got diagnosed about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So everything we've been describing so far has been over the last year and a half to 2 years.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed in October 2018 officially. Yeah.
Okay. So over 2 years. Mm-hmm. So in that 2 year window, aside from, because I specifically want to address DNRS and EMDR separately, is there anything you've done from a supplement, herbal, or pharmaceutical standpoint that has helped you significantly that you can offer as a tip or a hack, or maybe something that didn't work so well that you can kind of caution our listeners to about in regards to herbs, supplements, and pharmaceuticals?
The most helpful thing was opening up my detox pathways, knowing what that meant, sweating once a day. And then at one point I was even like allergic to my own sweat. So that was a thing. And that came again with that fear response. But for me, the basics I feel have been the most helpful. Not to say maybe Alinea wasn't helpful, and cat's claw did make me feel better for a long time, but like the basics of vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin B12, because I have an MTHFR, I'm homozygous for the C677T mutation, which I think a lot of folks with Lyme disease have this mutation, and we need B12 in order to methylize and properly detox. So like getting on that, getting my levels where they should be, and then kind of slowly but surely starting on binders and proper probiotics like Saccharomyces boulardii is a probiotic, but it also acts as a binder. People don't realize that. Finding binders that I could eat with food, because it was really frustrating when I got to the point of like, you get so many things recommended to you, intermittent fasting, yet you can't eat anything 2 hours before or 2 hours after this supplement or this medication. And like, your life turns into this, I don't know, like this, it feels almost a little bit oppressive. So I think finding the supplements that work best for my body and my schedule has been a really big deal. And I'm going to keep reiterating, not everyone's body is alike. So one supplement that works for me may not react well in your body.
There's a few things I just wanted to point out. There's so many gold nuggets in that statement. The first one is you have the MTHFR gene or genetic deficiency, which means you have a problem detoxing, and you overcame that by increasing your vitamin B, which allows your body to methylate or detox. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
And then secondly, you mentioned that you're using binders, which binders essentially take all these toxins and the die off, from things in your body. It binds it together, but then you have to eliminate or purge that stuff. And I think you mentioned earlier that you were having trouble actually purging, and then you talked about sweating. So could you just for a second give us a walkthrough of what detoxing looks like for you from beginning to end, to be able to bind and then extract or release all of these toxins, to purge all this from your body and to give your body a chance to heal?
Sure. So, the statement is kill, bind, sweat. So killing, let's just say the Lyme spirochetes, and then that's, and then having that bind to something. So it's not just floating around your system, and then being able to detox it. And I had it like, I wasn't really sweating, and maybe this is TMI, but I wasn't really having bowel movements. I didn't know about like lymphatic massage, like dry brushing, or seeing a lymphatic massage therapist. There's various ways to detox and to open up your pathways, but it wasn't discussed with me. So right now, like I take a supplement to help me have more bowel movements. I don't have a sauna. It's on my wish list, but I try to sweat once a day. And usually that means like going on a long walk, or maybe if I'm really feeling up for it, rarely, but doing like a strength-based exercise, and just eating extremely nutrient dense food that have detoxing elements to them. So that's been helpful. And I also need to mention holistic dentistry has also played a big part in my healing, in my opinion. I don't know if we're going to delve into that, but I have to make a shout out to it, because when I completed all of my cavitations, which, those are my cavitations where my wisdom teeth were, and there were chronic infections and they were deteriorating my jawbone. When I properly addressed those, I noticed a change in my health as well.
So I do want to come back to that, but to the kill, bind, sweat, right?
Yeah.
That's your framework to really deal with detoxing. The killing for everybody will be different, whether it's whether it's antibiotics, whether it's, in your case, I keep forgetting the name. What was the name of it again? The antiviral antibiotic. The
Alinea that I was on for a long time. Yeah.
Yep, the linea or maybe potentially cat's claw. Right, exactly. Yeah. So all of these things are killing, and that's going to vary from person to person what their kill protocol is. And that's the first piece of the detoxing framework. The second piece is the binding, and the third piece is really sweating. So I just want to go a little bit deeper into the binding and sweating pieces here. So from a binding standpoint, what do you use as a binder? Is it activated charcoal? What specifically do you use to bind the toxins in your body?
So I use a Cellcore. It's specific for viruses or and that one you can take with food. I also take chlorella, and chlorella is awesome because it doesn't just bind, it also is a blood builder. So like if you have anemia, let's just say, any issues with like your hemoglobin or ferritin levels, iron levels, it's a natural blood builder. So it works as, again, you're killing two birds with one stone. And then Saccharomyces boulardii, that also is technically a binder and a probiotic. So those are like the big ones I take. And then I am boosting, instead of taking something that's necessarily going to kill, I'm actually boosting my immune system with taking like mushroom blends. Both of my doctors are on par with that right now, because if my immune system is strong enough and I can get my natural killer cells up because they've been low for a minute, my body will naturally kill what it needs to kill and get rid of. And then these binders are going to bind to it, and I'm going to have open detox pathways in order to flush them out.
And thank you for pointing it out. So killing doesn't have to be from an antibiotic or an herb or pharmaceutical. You can boost your immune system, which will kill the bad stuff on its own. So that's another alternative to kill, which is very important.
Yes.
Now,
exactly. And that's not spoken about enough either. But
agreed.
Yeah, because Rich was saying like he's been bit by so many ticks but hasn't had symptoms. Well, that's probably because he had the immune system function to be able to take care of that for him.
And the final piece, the sweat. So this is something we get a lot of pushback from the community. So I'm hoping you can give us some tips and hacks and guidance on how to address this. So from somebody who's bedbound up into somebody who is in a limited manner mobile, how can somebody sweat if they are so sick they can barely get out of bed? And that's it. Being able to purge these binders and these toxins is so important. What advice would you give to those people who are too sick to exercise and sweat on their own?
Well, I had the privilege, my Lyme literate physician, he has a physical therapy office attached, and there's a Pilates coach, and she herself has you name it, she has it, Lyme, so on and so forth. And she, so I explained this to him. I'm going, I need a sweat. I know that I'm not doing well being on a couch. Like my muscles are deteriorating. This isn't like me at all. And then he was like, why don't you go see, Michelle next door? And that's kind of how I started, because she knows our bodies. Like she does a ton of research before she even meets with you, and she creates a plan that makes sense for you. And for me, with being so symptomatic, especially from the POTS, from the dysautonomia, my blood pressure plummeting and feeling like I'm going to faint, I do really well with exercises lying down. So, there are exercises you can do couch bound, wheelchair bound, bed bound, that still allow you to exercise and sweat without feeling like you're going to have a flare up or any other negative reaction. So I started super simple. I mean, basics. Like I know Richard Simmons would laugh at me if he saw where I started off, but that's what gave me the strength and the foundation to be where I am today, where I could start tolerating more and more physical activity and eventually sweat.
And Christina, I think you just gave us another good tip or framework for people that are bedbound or can't move around much. And that is there are ways to exercise laying down in bed or being in a wheelchair. And I think there's three major pieces to that. The first is it allows you to move and sweat, which helps you detox, which is the initial question I asked you. But then you went even deeper, and you talked about that it actually helps you move around because your muscles get weakened and they get atrophied. So it helps strengthen your muscles when you're bedbound. But also when you get to exercise, it also helps release certain brain chemicals that can make you happy as well, it sounds like, right?
Oh, yes. Good old endorphins. So there's exercise. We think exercise, and often we relate it to weight loss, looking good. No, what happens when you walk or do any sort of exercise, you are detoxing your lymphatic system. Your lymphatic system doesn't do much on its own. It really has to be prompted. And like walking is the best way to get it moving, to get it going. Because your poor lymphatic system is what's, circulating and detoxing. And so that's like the number one thing, is you are supporting your lymphatic system when you do any sort of physical activity. You're also lubricating your joints and muscles. And for me, I have something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And so I have, some joint concerns and issues. And I've noticed when I do especially strength-based training, I'm less symptomatic. I experience less pain, less inflammation, that sort of thing. And then the endorphins, wow, endorphins are so amazing to have. They have such healing components to them. They're totally underrated. Yeah. So
I do want to ask Christina, because you mentioned that, you teased that Richard Simmons would be, would laugh, but I want to really emphasize the point that many people that are listening to this are very sick and are intimidated to even walk around the block. Can you give us an example of an exercise that somebody can do laying down in bed or sitting in a chair that can be beneficial to their overall health from a detox, a sweating, and an endorphin releasing component?
Yeah. So like I started with doing things on my back, and it would be like as simple as like moving my legs to my head and, back down on the floor again. Like Michelle provided me with these really simple exercises, like just moving my arms up. If I felt comfortable adding some weight to moving my arms up. And when the more physical activity I did, the stronger I felt and the more hope I had. So there's again, it's that mind-body connection, but those endorphins are essentially, they make you happy, they give you hope, and it pushes you to keep trying more and more and more and more.
So the last thing I want to discuss with you, until you bring something else up that I'm going to want to ask you, is the whole this whole neural retraining part of Lyme disease, where you have to sort of retrain your brain because of being so chronically ill. You have to almost reset your brain, right? And there are different things out there like DNRS that you mentioned, and also EMDR. So have you done both? And if so, can you speak to both and how they've helped you in your healing journey?
Sure. So not only have I done EMDR, I'm trained as an EMDR psychotherapist. So I understand it. I started on the other side of the couch before going, oh my gosh, like I totally see the benefits. So I did them in conjunction with one another, which was very helpful because one addresses your traumas and the root cause of your negative belief patterns and where you are today, and allows you to release them. It's not like EMDR isn't going to change what happened to you. It helps change how you respond to what happened to you. Versus neural retraining allows you to start creating new associations, new neural patterns and pathways with things you once had negative associations with. So you're like, EMDR kind of gives you this like clean slate to work with, while something like DNRS, and I think there's other ones, Gupta, I don't know how to pronounce it, organic intelligence. There's so many different neural retraining programs out there, allows you to use that clean slate to start creating new neural pathways.
So in combination of everything we've discussed over the past 2 years, from a medical to an herbal to a supplemental to an emotional to a neural retraining, detoxing, etc., all of these things together have contributed to your current success. And clearly, I mean, we've been talking to you now for several hours, including our offline discussion. Yeah. So, and you clearly have you're very smart, and you clearly are not having any cognitive issues. So give us an assessment of where your health is at today based on where it was when you were at your worst.
I'm a completely different person. If you were to ask my, former partner, my parents, where I was versus now, because they yeah, I mean, to some extent it is subjective on their end, but they also see it objectively. They're just shocked. They're shocked because I think that they too had lost a little bit of hope at some point along with me. So to get from that point of like, Christina may not live for very long to Christina's like, I went from surviving to thriving, and like, I'm going to cry thinking about it.
You're making us cry too, so don't.
Sorry, I just.
Nope. I think we're both crying now.
I thought I was gonna die, and I'm now in this beautiful place. I get to see the sunrise and the sunset every day. I don't have to depend on anyone. I'm able to eat the foods I wasn't able to eat before. I don't have to live in fear every single second of the day, because that's exactly what was happening. I can work. My work isn't conventional. It's not full time. I create my own hours, but I'm working. I'm able to concentrate. I'm able to give people and things attention. I'm just so grateful that I feel as though I've been given a second chance to live, and words can't express my gratitude for that. And I hope and pray that I can offer the same to others.
So let's talk about your second life, Christina. You now have had your new lease on life, and a lot has changed as a result of you going from hell and back, right? So talk to us about what you've learned about yourself on this journey and how it's allowed you to now pursue the purpose that you were created to pursue.
I'm now a person who can speak their truth and not feel as worried about harming other people in doing so, being so obsessed and concerned about what other people are going to think if I do that. I no longer feel obligated to live in dis-ease, and I did for a long time without even having any awareness around it. I now follow my joy. The more I follow the joy, the healthier I feel. I practice gratitude every single day. There's a quote in the journal. It's only one quote, and it got me through Lyme disease. And it's Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a famous Buddhist and really, really popularized mindfulness. But it's breathe, you are alive. And the moment I wake up in the morning and I take a breath, my heart and soul are filled with gratitude, because for the longest time I was afraid I wouldn't wake up most mornings. And I don't know. I live in a totally different mindset now than I did before. And I recognize when things are unhealthy, and I do my best to nip them in the bud rather than just letting them simmer, because the body, there's Dr. Gabor Mate, the body says no, but it's true. When we don't feel like something is in alignment with what we want and what we need, our bodies will eventually say no for us. And my body said, excuse my language, but F no for a really long time, and I ignored it, and this is what came up. So I now live in the philosophy that if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. And
what had to be stripped from you and from your essence in order for your body to stop saying F no? What were you carrying with you that needed to be stripped off?
It was shame, guilt. In EMDR, it's like the most intense part of EMDR. And Matt, you said you did EMDR, right? You haven't done it? Okay.
I have not. No.
Okay. So you find the negative belief at the root of your trauma and what you're experiencing. And this is super maybe dark and deep, but I needed to get to this point that I didn't believe I deserved to live and be happy. That is where and how dark of a situation I had gone to. And I didn't realize it, of course. Like, it took a while, it took many sessions for us to come down to that. And because that was my negative belief at the root of everything, I then put everyone and everything else above me, because clearly they needed to live, they needed to thrive, not me. So hitting rock bottom emotionally and recognizing that was totally what changed things for me, because I was able to do like inner child work and realize, no, I do deserve to live. I do deserve to be happy. And I can do that while others do the same for themselves. It's not one or the other. You know, we can all get there on our own.
And that is awesome and beautiful. And so talk to us about some of the tools that you've used on your healing journey and how you've now created these tools and are now offering these tools for other people to use on their journey.
So I guess the biggest things are like, okay, finding a treatment team that believes you, that wants the best for you. Okay. That's like, that's like where I always, that's where I always start with. And then that treatment team, in my opinion, needs to include a therapist who specializes in both chronic illness and trauma, because I have yet to meet anyone to this day with chronic illness who doesn't have trauma. I think non-toxic living is another one. Mitigating toxins in your life so that your body can focus on what is actually toxic in your body, like not adding more to the plate, if you will. Meditating has been an amazing tool for me, and meditation can look different for everyone. Sometimes we're like, oh, you meditate every day. And it's like, yeah, but sometimes my meditation is for like 30 seconds, and that's okay. It's whatever, it's a bite-sized approach. It shouldn't make you feel like you're obligated or oppressed. It should make you feel like it helps you and is a helpful tool. Of course, like neural retraining, we already discussed that. Journaling. Journaling was, I look at healing as a pie, and each piece is just as important as one or the other. And all of these things are pieces of the pie I'm describing. Support groups that are solution focused, not problem focused. You should leave any social interaction feeling good and energized, not depleted, not concerned, not hopeless. And the moment you do, those are components of dis-ease, and we're all trying to avoid dis-ease. We're already in that. Let's try to move away from that. And the opposite of dis-ease is ease. So you get into any social interaction or anything you do in life, and you want to feel ease around it. So I think that's a big one. Prioritizing self-care and whatever that may look like to you. Easier said than done, of course, but keep going back to, finding your joy and what makes you happy, and not being concerned about what other people think about it. It's whatever works for you. I think movement, like we discussed, is really important. There are Victoria Failing, I know, is one on Instagram, and she's a coach, and she specifically works with those with chronic illness. And creates exercise plans. She does like, she offers like a bunch of free like exercises on her Instagram for being couch bound or bed bound, and like teaches you how to do them. And I think if you work with her, she creates an actual plan, which is nice. And she gets it. She has Lyme herself, and she's currently healing from it. And it's great to work with people who are healing from Lyme, because not only do they understand where you're coming from and offer you so much compassion and like, and flexibility, because often, you know, we were planning on doing this podcast, I think over a year ago, but I had some health stuff come up. I mean, I've had to reschedule more than once, and you guys have been like the kindest about it. And that's reflective of how awesome you are as human beings, but also like the positives of being around folks who are healing from chronic illness. They really understand, and with that comes this ultimate compassion. So back to working with people who are healing, they get you, and they're realistic, and they usually have extremely hopeful stories, which we all need to hear from time to time. And I think like one of the, you know, the biggest tools is like believing you can heal. Like I'm gonna repeat this over and over again. You can heal, you can heal, you will heal. You know, these words are powerful. Our bodies hear everything we say, everything. And even if it sounds like complete BS at the time, just keep saying it over and over and over again, because your body will start to believe it. Your body doesn't understand nuances between something that has happened and something that will happen. Meaning, if you visualize something wonderful that's going to happen to you, like if you meditate and you visualize like, I'm going to be hiking a mile in 2 months, that's where I want to be, and you keep imagining it or visualizing it, your body's going to start to believe it. It's going to start to believe it will get there. So those are, I would say, like my my biggest tools that I continue to use.
So let's focus on journaling and the journal that you've created. Can you share with our listeners the work you've done with journaling and how you are bringing your journaling experience to the larger community?
Sure. When I was asking far and wide for any recommendations to heal me, because I thought I was dying, I'm like, I am desperate. Tell me, give me anything. Someone had recommended the Walls protocol. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Terry Walls, she healed herself from MS, multiple sclerosis. She was wheelchair bound. She was incredibly sick. She went from that to riding a bike within 6 months' time, because she did all of this research on what worked on, I think it was like lab rats, and applied it to herself, of course, in like larger quantities, because she's, you know, she's a little bit larger than a rat. So she just started experimenting with herself, and she figured it out, and she created a book around it. But one of the things she's like, before you start my protocol, you need to start journaling. Like that's what you need to start doing. And I thought I journaled maybe in high school and, you know, maybe a little bit in college, but I never took it super seriously. And what she meant by journaling is like, she was like journaling maybe some of your symptoms. And what I did was, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to start, I started creating prompts for myself. And yes, like there were the, you know, how much I slept, what I ate, what fluids I took in, but then I added more things to it, like where my blood pressure was, where my oxygen was, where I was in my menstrual cycle. But then I'm like, you know what, there's also this emotional component, because I started reading more about the mind-body connection. I'm like, I'm going to create some like emotional prompts as well, to see where I am mental health wise, you know, in all of this. And then I started reading about gratitude and self-love and how much that plays a part in our mental and physical health. So I added a prompt for gratitude. Then I read a story about a woman who was so sick. And what she started doing was she started telling every body part of hers how much she loved it, because there's a prompt about one thing you love about your body. And she was able, it was radical remission, but she was able to heal herself. Like, even though she totally was like disgusted by her body and what it was doing to her, she would go through every little body part and express her love for it. So I added that as a prompt, which was both one of the most difficult, I think it's arguably one of the most difficult prompts in the journal, but it's also one of the most cathartic and healing prompts, because we get to a point in chronic illness where we hate our bodies. We think it's attacking us. And in fact, it's totally the opposite. Our bodies want us to heal just as much as we do. What our bodies are just, they're under attack. They're under attack and they're doing what they're supposed to do. And it feels like they're attacking you, but that's not the case. And creating this new and healthy relationship with our bodies is really beautiful and amazing. Self-love and compassion are just profound components of healing. Anyway, I was really tired when I created these prompts, but I knew it needed to be done. And I would write them night after night. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to look for a journal that's sort of similar to this, so I don't have to keep writing this down. Like, I only have so much energy, so many spoons in one day. And I found some that were like symptom journals. I found some that are like mental health journals. I found gratitude journals, but I didn't find any that combined it all. And I'm like, well, even if I find one that has like half the prompts, at least it'll save me. And I couldn't find anything like it. And I realized this needed to be created, not just for myself, because I was tired of writing these prompts down, but because it needed to be shared with this world. And you know, in this process, because I realized this months down the line that it needed to happen, you know, I would look at where I was, and some days I'd feel so crappy, like I'm not going anywhere. Like I'm still so sick. And I would go back to an entry like a month or two ago and think like, oh my gosh, I am way further than I thought I was. And I needed to see that written down to really recognize that. And then I also noticed like which supplements maybe were causing me issues, or which food, or I noticed I didn't, you know, when I didn't sleep this amount of hours, I was more symptomatic. Like I was able to really start tracking my health. And like, that's when I felt like chronic illness, Lyme disease, and Matt, maybe you can agree with this. It can feel like someone's taken all your power away from you. It's pretty,
I can totally relate.
Like someone's just siphoned it, sucked it out. And you're like, we were saying, like, you're just a vessel of a human being, and that's it. And when I started journaling every day, I felt empowered for the first time in a long time, that like, I was tracking my health. I was connecting the dots. I wasn't depending on someone else to do that for me, because they kind of were, they kind of weren't. And like, we can heal ourselves. And the journal got me to the point of realizing that in many ways, and then being able to take the necessary steps to add in other healing modalities, like we had discussed, like eventually DNRS, eventually EMDR.
You know, your journaling process is more than just tracking information. It's also done in the context of pro-social emotions like gratitude. So talk to us about how you connected both the empowering elements of tracking your information, so that you are A, tracking it, and B, having the ability to look back to see how you've improved, and to see patterns that are developing over time, but also doing it in a way that's allowing you to have gratitude, so that you will have a pro-social emotion that will allow you to continue to heal.
Yeah, so my prompts were created with brain fog in mind, meaning like it's so like you can fill out an entry within 5 minutes, or you can spend 20 minutes filling it out. It's meant for anyone on the spectrum of chronic illness. When I was doing research on journaling and its impact on physical and mental health, like I knew its impact on mental health. Like it helps you process what you're experiencing. And I think that's like, everyone knows that. But when I read that it actually helps you. They've done a study on wounds and how people who had open wounds who journaled healed quicker than those who didn't. I was pretty mind blown. And when I started doing research on like these various components, like you had discussed, like gratitude and how gratitude plays such a role in healing, I'm like, we need to bring that in, because if you're just documenting your symptoms, it might, it may, I don't know how to say this. We were talking about our flight or flight mode. If it's just symptoms and you feel really negative and that's all you're tracking and documenting, it may keep you on that hamster wheel of, I'm not doing well. And you repeat that to yourself, like clearly this. But when I intentionally have you track your symptoms first and your vitals and your food and whatever, and then we move over to an emotional component where we check in with our mental health, where we check in with our frustrations, where we check in with any symptoms we're having. Then we move down to one thing you learned today. When we move down to one thing you love about your body, when we move down to what are you grateful for today? And then when we move down to one visualization exercise of what's one thing you want to accomplish tomorrow, just one, and one thing you accomplished today. And if you look at my entries, my accomplishment was sometimes as simple as I took a shower today. I brushed my hair today. I ate. I was able to like make myself a meal today. Those things, accomplishments are on a spectrum, but when you have chronic illness, when you're that sick, that's a big deal. And every little thing needs to be celebrated. And then the visualizations, and doing research about visualizations, and like I discussed, our brain's not recognizing the nuances of something that has already happened versus something that hasn't even happened. I've noticed, and not just for myself using the journal, from so many people who they're like, just jotting down one thing I'm planning to do tomorrow allows me to do it. Like I actually end up doing it, and I don't feel overwhelmed with, what I need to accomplish the next day. So every single prompt is thoughtful and research-based, and also based in my own experience and understanding.
So if our listeners would like to either purchase the online version of your journal or the hard copy, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so you can go to www.beginwithintoday.com, and you can also use a code Tick Boot Camp for 10% off, which I created. Yes, you can purchase it on there. You can also purchase it on Instagram or Facebook, also at Begin Within Today. And the name is just, I think it's really important to talk about the name of the journal, of my psychotherapy practice, because everything begins within, and you can start over at any given point, any day, anytime.
If someone was looking to get in contact with you and work with you professionally, are you taking patients, and how would they get in touch with you if they wanted to work with you?
I do have a waiting list at this moment in time. However, I am starting chronic illness groups as of next month. And they're going to have various focuses. Like there's going to be one on self-love. There's going to be one about relationships. There's going to be a caregiver support group that I'm starting, because we need more of those for our lovely caregivers and family members. There's going to be one on entrepreneurship and chronic illness and just working in general. I may even have one about like following your ease and the importance of that. And those groups are going to be a lot more accessible, because I'll be able to take in more folks into them. And then the price is a little less than what I would charge for one-to-one psychotherapy. I also should mention that I do facilitate a monthly Lyme disease empowerment circle through the Bay Area Lyme Foundation, and and their San Diego Lyme Association, their chapter. So if you'd like to attend that and see what maybe group therapy may look like, you can feel free to. It's free for all to attend, including caregivers and loved ones, anyone affected by Lyme disease. And we even have people who maybe don't know if they have Lyme disease. They're on their journey of getting diagnosed and figuring it out. And I will say there's not, although Lyme does get brought up here and there, that's not the entire focus of the groups. We choose different topics each month. And I think people feel quite empowered and hopeful when they walk out of there, which is the goal of getting together and doing this.
So now I'm going to ask you our final question.
Sure.
Your mom played a really important role in your life. Not only did she take care of you. I'm sorry?
You're going to make me cry again.
Well, your mom took care of you when you were born, when you were unable to take care of yourself. Yeah. And then you had this circle in your life where you were unable to take care of yourself again, and your mom was the person who took care of you.
Yeah.
So now I want you to tell me what advice you would give to her, or someone who is as good to anyone in the world as your mom has been to you. If she came in and showed you that she was being bitten by a tick, what would you recommend that she do so she wouldn't have to go on a terrible chronic Lyme disease journey?
First of all, I think I'd mentioned this in the questionnaire. I'd learned that, let's just say if you found a tick, applying liquid hand soap in a counterclockwise direction over the bite forces the tick out of your skin and should keep the head intact. And I know the Bay Area Lyme Foundation, like you would place it in a bag, like any amount of the tick you're able to get out, and you can send it for free to the Bay Area Lyme Foundation. And what they'll do is they'll test it. But, in the interim, don't want to waste a moment of time. I would contact a Lyme literate physician ASAP, in order to find out what to do next. And then in the interim of that, I would personally load up on anything that supports the immune system's function. Like we were discussing, like vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, whatever works for your body. And then keeping calm. Like, of course, it's really scary to see a tick and to know what we know now about Lyme disease. It's really frightening. But the best thing you can do is keep calm. Not everyone develops Lyme disease, as you've experienced yourself, with lots of tick bites. So not to presume the worst, to really hope for the best. Stay in a calm state until you can see the doctor, because our immune system functions best when we have the parasympathetic taking the wheel, not the sympathetic. We don't want that cortisol overloading our system and affecting our immune system's function. We want our immune system to be completely supported in every which way.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Christina Kantzavelos. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Christina and her Lyme disease journey, please visit her Instagram page at Buenquamino, Buenquamino. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of our post. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a tick bite blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been provided by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at www.tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note we would appreciate any input or any improvements you would like to share with us. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, please take a minute to leave us an honest review and rating on iTunes or on our website. Thank you for listening.